Hello and welcome to A Different Atheist Reads, A History of God by Karen Armstrong. I'm Christy, and this week I'm giving you a substitute lecture because I've been on the road with my work and unable to really engage with Augustine as much as possible, as necessary really to do a video. And also Karen opens up the door in this chapter to discuss the misogyny in Christianity. And there is no way that I'm going to let that pass me by without a deep amount of preparation, starting with allow me to retort. So I'm going to pretty much spend the Easter weekend planning a lecture on religious patriarchy, and so it'll probably have the same amount of commitment and passion that my videos on the historical Jesus and the Trinity have, because this is one of those topics too where I have very firm opinions that are grounded in my analysis over many, many years. And I have been waiting basically since I started my channel to do a really good explanation and rant on religious patriarchy and why I despise it so much. So I think it's worth taking a little bit more time to get that ready. So if you are watching this on the playlist and you're not interested in anything except a history of God, please, you can leave now and go to the next video or wait till next week. But for those of you who are just more broadly interested in what is going on my channel, what I'd like to do today is talk to you a little bit about the new atheism videos that I've just put up and what's going on with my life and where things are kind of more casually. So if you don't want to watch that, bye. And if you want to, then stick around. All right, you're here, you stuck around, great. So let's have a little chat. So how are things with me? Things with me are going very well. I'm busy, it's been crazy, but really good. I was in Sheffield in England getting rained on for 3 days in a row, basically at a political studies conference, then came up on Wednesday night to Dundee, Thursday night, something like that. I can't remember what day it was. And it must have been Wednesday night. And we ran our first focus groups for the general election then the next day, the Thursday. And then today is Friday. Yes, today is Friday. And tomorrow I fly back to Germany. So it's been crazy but exciting. And I won't go off on the general election. I'll try to keep it on new atheism. But if you are interested in what I'm doing in terms of research on the British general election, then you can go to the QESB channel that I'm also running here on YouTube. Because I haven't had time to prep for Karen's book and I presented the videos on new atheism, not only did I want to present those to you, but I also wanted to give you some of my thoughts because I wasn't on camera because I was during the Q&A section after the people presented their papers. So I wanted to talk a little bit about how I saw the presentation of new atheism at this conference that I was at in Sheffield, and I'll say a little bit more about what that was all about. And then I will also give you my responses. Well, actually, I had like a whole page that I wanted to talk to the panel about, but I only got about 1/10 of it out. So I'll do a longer talk on what I saw as the strengths and the weaknesses of the academic situation where they are in terms of their analysis of new atheism. The Political Studies Association of the United Kingdom has a religion and politics specialist group. And it was this religion and politics specialist group that hosted the panel on new atheism. So the talks that were given, let me just look those up, get the titles right. The first on the agenda was what is really new about new atheism, and the second talk was called Political Responses to New Atheism. Both of those were recorded. The speakers allowed me permission to record them and also put them up on my channel under Creative Commons license. So you can watch those by clicking, I'm sure I'll put one of those cards in the corners, so you can click on those and watch those talks. My comments might end up making more sense after you've watched the talks, but basically in order to give some context in case you don't want to go and watch 30 minutes of lectures or paper presentations as preparation from my part. The papers themselves tended to focus on new atheism and the elites. So there was a lot of mention of Dawkins and Harris, Hitchens and Dennett, although there was also a very large acknowledgement of within the people on the panel that there are a lot of atheists who do not get the same kind of media exposure, A.C. Grayling, for instance, here in the UK. So there was a critique within the panel about the overemphasis and focusing too much on the personalities that are the face of new atheism in the media, but really cannot be in any way meaningfully said to speak for atheists in general. The reason why new atheism has become a topic of political interest, I think, is because it's becoming a social movement. It's no longer, new atheism isn't about lowercase a atheism. It's about capital N, new, capital A atheism, new atheism as a social movement that has a specific agenda that I will explain a little bit more in a second. And they contrast this new atheism with old atheism. The old atheism was basically all the atheism that existed before the release of the God delusion, for all intents and purposes. Some of the panelists pointed out there are new features about new atheism that we did not see in traditional atheism. For instance, a focus on science and using science as a deliberate counter against religious faith in the public debate, that we have critiques about the role of religion in things like terrorism, where, and this was pointed out on the panel, that many times people will say when there is an act of terrorism, they will point to the economic or social drivers of those actions, whereas the new atheist movement is the voice out there saying, when people say they're blowing themselves up because of their religious beliefs, we should take them at their word and look at the way that religion is inspiring them to do that. And so that kind of critique of the causes of terrorism is something that I see these academics really attributing directly to new atheism, that other people skirt around the issue and don't want to directly attribute it to religion, but new atheism is the voice that does that. So new atheism is sort of characterized by being an Anglo-American phenomenon. It is, again, science-based. It is out in trying to get science in the public square. It's trying to get atheism in the public square and taking religion head on in a way that previously atheists would usually have some sort of compatibilism. If you think back in the 1800s and 1700s, even people who were maybe known to be atheists, we're not looking to remove religion from the public square, whereas there are parts of the new atheist movement, not all of it, but parts of it, which really do have an agenda to remove the influence of religion from the secular institutions of sort of Western democracies, because that's mostly where the activists are located, but obviously not just there, across the world as well. And I think that these are all very fair assessments, although perhaps could use a little bit more nuance, but then again, what couldn't? So being an American, being someone who's had to out herself as an atheist, and when my family, parts of my family found out that I was atheist, it kind of kicked off and there was an argument. I wasn't there actually for it, but apparently these things happened because people found out that I was now an atheist activist on YouTube. These kinds of lived experiences were not yet part of the academic discourse. Nobody on the panel used the word closeted to describe atheism or atheist activists. Again, because the information is easier to find, a lot of them tend to focus on public atheists and their comments, and then look a little bit and try not to generalize to the activist community. But from my assessment, there's been very little effort or success yet at identifying the views of activists. Now, these academics recognized, and all of them recognized, the role of the internet in providing people who live in rural areas who might not be able to talk to other people who are like-minded. This allows them a place to find information and feel, less alone. But I don't think that the kinds of social interactions and movements that have been created as a consequence of the internet for atheists around the world is yet appreciated. Once I mentioned it in the comments about closeting and the idea of coming out, the fact that atheists very much see the LGBT movement as a role model for how to normalize a marginalized group. There were acknowledgements that kind of thing does happen. And there was also acknowledgement that as Europeans, it's much easier to be an atheist publicly. I mean, Nick Clegg is basically an atheist, and he's one of the major party leaders. So I think in terms of their understanding of how being an atheist in a majority Christian nation where Christian privilege surrounds you is something that they're slightly sensitive to, but I think it could use more development to understand what really drives the atheist, atheists like me, into social action and social justice. Finally, the last critique I had of the conversation, of the panel, of the papers, and it's not like a bad thing, it's just an observation, that because of its relative newness, that new atheism as a concept is still very much located in personalities. There's very little survey data that's reliable about atheism and atheists. until very recently, you had these nuns, the people who had no religious affiliation, but we were considered, just like the category that you would have all the religious stuff and then you'd have the nuns for anybody else. But now, especially in Europe, the not religiously affiliated have become such a large group. I think one of the presenters had a number with a social attitude survey where if you asked people, 44% of people in the UK, and that was a high number, said that they had no religious affiliation whatsoever. The numbers were as low as like 36, I think, to 44% of respondents over a variety of surveys. And you saw a trend over time where a real rise of this non-affiliation. The problem for social scientists now is that we don't know what the nuns are. We don't know what non-affiliation means. And what we need to start doing is routing people who say, I have no affiliation with a religion, to say, would you identify yourself as any of these categories? Secularist, humanist, atheist, agnostic. And I think probably better than making people pick one would be to allow them to pick many, because unlike being a Catholic or being a Methodist or being a Baptist, I am a secularist, and I am a humanist, and I am an atheist. In some ways, I'm also an agnostic, but I probably would tend to use atheism because it's a clearer representation of my identity. But I'm not an atheist and not a secularist. I'm not an atheist, but then not a humanist. These are categories that actually social science hasn't had enough people to meaningfully define, and also for us to kind of, also accept what is an atheist, what isn't an atheist. Is it merely a lack of belief in gods? And then if that is a category, then where does humanism, how does that relate to it? Do you have to be an atheist and a humanist, or an agnostic and a humanist? Is there any difference? And these might seem like trivial questions, but for survey research, they're actually quite important, as you know my commitment to conceptual clarity and precision. I think overall the panel was fantastic. It was really great to hear academics engaging with New Atheism as a social movement, as an identity movement, as a group that has values and positions that want to be articulated in the public sphere and to contest things. I think all of that is fantastic because it is happening and we need to understand it better. And I also think it's very much in its infancy. This new area of a social phenomenon and the study of it is also in its infancy. So my role, I guess I would say, as a scholar activist scholar, is to try to be more of a reflection of what is happening in the online activist community. Because I think most of our activism does come from online interaction, which makes it very difficult for academics to observe. So podcasts and YouTube activity and the way that people use the internet to exchange information or to connect up with people to sign a petition, or other ways that we use to push back on proposals to make the Bible the official state book, or to erect the Ten Commandments on public spaces. These are all very difficult to observe if you're not part of the movement. So I'm hoping that with this channel and with my commitment to both good social research and to true equality through secular institutions, that I can be the link between, one link between academia and activism. So my battery's running out because I recorded way too many things today. So I'm going to wrap this up. I've been Christy. You've been awesome. I hope you enjoyed the substitute lecture, and I'll see you guys next week on a different Atheist Reads. Bye.